Meal could have killed me and I never ordered it. That's what he said, calmly, after being served a seafood dish he never requested, one that triggered a mild allergic reaction on a first-class seat he paid for in full. Around him, other passengers laughed over steak and champagne, their names called with warmth. His, misspelled on the menu, ignored at every turn, the only black man in the cabin and the only one handed a downgraded tray, delayed service and a plastic fork, but no one expected what came next, because while they dismissed him as just another overbooked passenger, he was quietly tracking everything. If any of that hit close to home, don't just scroll past. Hit like if this story made you feel something, subscribe if you want more stories that dig beneath the surface. And drop a comment where are you watching from, and which part stayed with you. We read them all. This story's just getting started. Darius Cole settled into seat 1A of the Stratus Air flight to Zurich, adjusting the crisp lapel of his dark gray suit. The seat enveloped him in quiet luxury, hand-stitched leather, brushed chrome finishes, and a chilled glass of sparkling water waiting on the tray table. Outside the window, the sun was retreating behind a veil of tangerine clouds, casting a warm glow on the fugitive. Everything about this flight spoke of precision and exclusivity, except for the quiet tension that slithered in moments before takeoff. He didn't seek attention. At 42, Darius had long mastered the art of quiet dominance. Founder and CEO of Colnova, one of the leading cybersecurity and AI firms in the US, he carried his legacy not on his sleeve, but in the weight of his presence. He was the type of man who didn't need to say his name for a room to know it. A flight attendant appeared beside him, a woman in her early 40s with porcelain skin, tightly pulled blonde hair, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Karen H. She held a tray and spoke with a crispness honed over years of surface-level civility. "Mr. Cole, is it? Here's your entree," she said, placing the tray in front of him. Darius glanced down. The smell hit him first, briny, creamy, unmistakably seafood. He blinked once. "I ordered the prime rib." "No seafood," he said calmly. Not confrontational, just factual. Karen hesitated for half a beat, then smiled wider. "Oh, this is what the system shows. It's probably just a last-minute substitution. Happens all the time. It's still first-class quality." He looked at her. Not annoyed, not surprised, just still. "Seafood triggers a mild allergy for me. Victory outers subjugates." "Well," she said with a subtle shrug, "our options are limited tonight. The chefs likely had to make adjustments for guests with more specific needs." The emphasis hung like smoke. Darius didn't flinch. He looked at the plate once more, a glistening salmon fillet with a delicate herb crust and risotto, garnished as though that might mask the substitution. He glanced at her, eyes steady. "Water will do." Karen nodded curtly. "Suit yourself." She took the tray away, her heels clicking a little harder than necessary on the soft carpet. As the plane ascended into the fading light, Darius leaned back, eyes closed, mind drifting to the contract awaiting him in Zurich, a multi-billion-dollar data security merger that would redefine European cybersecurity. But 20 minutes later, the smell returned. Another attendant, younger and seemingly unaware, approached with a second tray. "Your meal, sir." This time it was a different, distinct linguine smothered in white wine sauce. Darius frowned slightly. "This isn't mine either," he said, even calmer than before. The attendant blinked, checked the tray label. "It's marked for seat 1A. I've already refused the seafood entree, twice now." The young man gave a nervous nod. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll look into it." He turned and scurried off, embarrassed. Not long after, Karen returned with a faux apologetic smile. "You must understand," she said, placing a tray down again, this time with a basic chicken salad and no label. "When supplies tight, we prioritize regular elite flyers." "And I'm not one of those?" he asked. Karen didn't answer. Her silence spoke volumes. Darius took one look at the chicken salad. The lettuce was wilted, the protein looked gray, undersuiters. He sighed and pushed the tray aside. "I'm fine." But 5 minutes later, the itching began, subtle, under his chin. Then, a warming sensation across his lips. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small epinephrine pen just in case. His allergy had never been life-threatening, but irritating enough to demand care. He didn't need the pen, not yet. but the symptoms were undeniable. He buzzed the attendant call button. Karen returned with measured steps, eyes already rehearsing the dismissive smile. "Yes, Mr. Cole." "This salad had traces of shellfish in the dressing. I'm having a reaction, mild but noticeable." She tilted her head. "Are you sure it's not just nerves? Some people react that way when flying." Pause. Darius stared at her for 3 seconds that felt like 30. "I run cybersecurity for unmanned defense drones. I don't think turbulence gives me hives." Karen smiled again. "Well, if you insist, I'll note it. Our in-flight medkit has antihistamines. Would you like one?" "I'll use mine," she said, inconvenienced. As Karen left, Darius glanced across the cabin. Guests laughed over their wines, forks clinking against porcelain, white gloves serving premium wagyu and lobster. In the row ahead, a man toasted with champagne while receiving the exact steak Darius had ordered. He watched, not out of jealousy, but recognition. He had seen this play before, different stage, same meal, or meals. This was about assumption, categorization, quiet dismissal hidden under politeness. He pulled out his tablet, opened a secure screen, and typed a single phrase: "Trace tray routing flight 917-1A." He locked the screen and leaned back again, eyes still, pulse steady, but the wheels were already in motion. The turbulence had smoothed into a quiet glide as the cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting a golden hue over the first-class cabin. Darius sat still, hands folded neatly in his lap, but his eyes were scanning, not out of paranoia but calculation. In his world, patterns were everything. What appeared subtle to most often screamed to those trained to hear silent signals. He looked at the linen set before him. Everyone else had thick, crisply folded white napkins, impeccable and elegant, edges sharp like origami. His was different, softer, creased, folded carelessly, like it had been pulled from a drawer in a rush and flattened by hand. It looked used. He unfolded it slowly, brushing his fingers along the fabric. A faint red smudge, like diluted lipstick or perhaps marinara sauce, stained one corner. The smell of sanitizer masked nothing. Beside the napkin sat the utensils, plastic, wrapped in a sterile paper sleeve, flimsy compared to the polished silver glinting on his neighbor's trays. The attendant had already walked away. No explanation, no apology, just this quiet difference that seemed small but wasn't. Darius looked to his left, C-1B. The passenger there, a man in his 50s, sun-spotted skin, navy sport coat with gold cufflinks, was smiling and laughing into a phone call that clearly hadn't been silenced despite rules. A waiter-styled attendant approached him with 2 hands, carefully balancing a covered silver tray. "Your prime rib, sir," he said, placing it with a light bow. Darius's head tilted just slightly. He couldn't help but glance at the tray, then at the passenger. The dish was unmistakable, the exact meal Darius had pre-ordered. A 9 Oz center-cut prime rib with wild mushroom jus and a truffle. Infused employments are the sign that Darius turned back to his own tray, empty, the plastic cutlery now looking even more out of place. He hadn't expected his pre-order to be denied. He had never once in the last 12 years of flying first class had it happen. Not once. He didn't need to ask how it had happened, but for documentation's sake he pressed the call button. Karen returned, smooth and unhurried. "Yes, Mr. Cole?" He kept his tone low. "I see that the guest in 1B received the prime rib." Her eyes didn't flicker. "That's correct. That was the meal I pre-ordered a week ago," he said evenly. "Confirmed by the Stratus system. I have the email if needed." Karen offered a poised nod. "Yes, I'm aware. However, Mr. Radcliffe," she gestured slightly to the man beside him, still on the phone, "submitted a late request just this morning. He's a Diamond Tier Legacy member. In these situations, priority is given to our most senior loyalty clients. But suit, the person who ordered first receives the substitution," Darius replied, more to himself than her. Karen smiled. "It's not ideal, but we try to accommodate based on history." "Not merit," he said quietly. She either didn't hear or pretended not to. "You still have the chicken salad, sir?" "Yes, I do." She walked away, her posture a portrait of manufactured grace. Across the aisle, A young woman with red nails and designer sunglasses received a second refill of Cotonouf du Pape, the same label Darius had listed in his profile preferences. He hadn't been offered a wine list. That was deliberate now. The pattern had gone from subtle to precise. Darius leaned back in his seat and opened his tablet. He didn't log into a normal app. He accessed a system only a handful of people on Earth had credentials for, NovaTrack Sentinel, a live auditing tool used by military and elite commercial clients. He wasn't there to retaliate. He was here to document. Quietly. Thoroughly. He began inputting markers: meal inconsistency, utensil discrepancy, fabric variance. The system timestamped each observation and mapped it to the flight timeline. He annotated it with brief tags: priority override, 1B, service discrepancy, utensil downgrade, cabin fabric. Perhaps he'd overheard, perhaps not. Either way, he raised his glass with a smile and said, "No hard feelings, huh? Just the perks of loyalty." The smile didn't reach Darius. "You're right," he replied coolly. "Loyalty always comes with a cost." The man chuckled, not catching the edge beneath the words. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, delivering coffee and small desserts with practiced rhythm. Darius didn't touch his tray. A warm towel arrived in a basket. His was noticeably cooler than the rest. Karen approached again. "Can I take anything for you, Mr. Cole?" "No, thank you," he said without looking up. She paused for a second, perhaps sensing the shift in energy, then walked on. Darius tapped into the cabin's live provisioning log. Something even senior attendants didn't know was visible to VIP security clients like him. The server routes told a clear story. His meal was reassigned 34 minutes before boarding. The utensils were swapped at gate D5 by a handler marked as Tier 3 crew. The linen change wasn't logged. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. All of it, and the timing aligned with a staffing shift specifically, when Karen had stepped into supervisory position for the flight manifest. He locked the screen. He didn't need to say anything, not yet. Not even when the man in 1B leaned over again and said, "Don't take it personal, buddy. This is just how things work in the sky." Slowly, his voice a thread of composure. "I understand completely. Some things only work because nobody questions them." The man blinked, unsure whether he was being complimented or condemned. Darius returned his gaze forward, the hum of the jet engine now whispering a deeper song, one he knew by heart. Patterns, bias, micro-choices that added up to something unmistakable, something intentional. And he wasn't done observing. Not yet. The cabin had settled into its usual first-class lull. Soft jazz pulsed faintly through the overhead system. Wine glasses chimed gently with every movement, and the subtle clink of dessert spoons tapping porcelain created a rhythm of indulgent comfort. Darius Cole remained poised in his seat, hands still, eyes watching. He hadn't touched the salad again. The mild reaction from earlier had faded, but the sour aftertaste lingered, not from the dressing, but from the room spoke to him in gestures, not words. But now those gestures began to sharpen, and so did the words. Near the curtain that divided the galley from the cabin, two flight attendants stood half-hidden, whispering and laughing softly between duties. Darius didn't look their way, but his hearing was precise, trained over years of reading boardrooms and backdoor deals. He heard one of them, a tall male attendant with a clipped British accent, mutter, "People like that will eat whatever you give them." He said it low, like a joke tossed toward familiarity. The other attendant snorted in response, clearly entertained, before straightening his posture and walking back out with a tray of dessert wines. Darius remained still, his expression unreadable, just a smile, not one of amusement but recognition, the kind that said, "Ah, so we're here now." He made a mental note of the voice, cross-referenced it with the staff manifest still open on his tablet's secure screen. The name, Owen L., listed as senior on board hospitality. Darius didn't need to flag it yet. He just let it settle. Let it become part of the file. The truth didn't need to be dragged out. It revealed itself when left alone long enough. The cabin's atmosphere resumed its silky tempo, but it didn't take long for another shift to come this time. Not from the crew, but from the passengers. Across the aisle, in seat 2C, a woman in her late 20s leaned toward her companion. She wore a designer blazer far too warm for a plain gold hoops just large enough to demand attention, and a smile curved like a question mark. Her voice, low and just slightly slurred from the second glass of Chardonnay, carried louder than He doesn't really look like he belongs here, does he? She whispered. Maybe some tech startup loophole or crypto pump. He's too quiet to be a real player. Her companion, a tall, clean-shaven man in his 30s, likely her boyfriend, chuckled. New money types. They show up dressed like they're headed to a board meeting, but always freeze up when the wine list shows more than 2 digits. Darius heard it all. Every syllable. He didn't flinch. He didn't even turn. But his hand slid slowly to his tablet again. Not to take notes, he had already remembered it, but to activate a silent subroutine. Passenger interaction capture, Zone 1A to 2C audio mark request. In a matter of seconds, the internal mic logs flagged that moment and stored it in encrypted format. Stratus Air didn't know it, but when they'd signed with Colnova to handle executive-level data protection, they'd agreed to a full environmental trace on designated VIP accounts. Darius rarely invoked it. He wasn't petty, he was patient. The words hadn't hurt. He had heard worse, from higher places. What stuck wasn't the insult, it was the casual dismissal that dismissed others when they thought power wore only one skin, one accent, one pedigree. He glanced down at his Mont Blanc pen, resting beside his untouched salad. Custom, engraved. A gift from the Department of Defense after Colnova secured their military encryption systems 3 years ago. But the woman in 2C didn't see that. She saw skin, silence, and decided that meant lesser. Moments later, the male passenger, probably emboldened by drink and affirmation, called over a flight attendant and pointed to Darius's tray. "Excuse me," he said, voice light but unmistakably performative. "I think there's been a mix-up. Shouldn't that salad have gone to the economy? It's looking a bit budget." The flight attendant smiled awkwardly, not sure if it was a joke or a complaint, but said nothing, and walked away. Darius exhaled slowly through his nose. The commentary wasn't clever. It wasn't even particularly mean. It was mundane, predictable, worn smooth by repetition. His phone buzzed lightly, a vibration only he could hear. Aaliyah, his executive assistant back in Manhattan, had sent a ping. "Security review logs syncing. Discrepancies found in dietary override. Want me to activate full audit?" He tapped back in. "Not yet, let's finish watching the show." The worst enemy of injustice wasn't vengeance, it was exposure. And exposure required patience. One mistake, one smug word at the wrong time, and the entire system would illuminate itself. Across the aisle, the woman in 2C giggled again and whispered, "He's got the CEO face but no CEO energy." Her boyfriend raised his glass. "Let's just hope he doesn't own the airline." Darius smiled, but this time it wasn't for himself. It was for them. Because they didn't realize how close they were to being the punchline of their own joke. He shifted slightly in his seat, checking the seatbelt's tension, and let his arm rest. The overhead speaker chimed a flight announcement about turbulence. Nothing serious, nothing real. Just like the prejudice surrounding him. Barely a ripple on the surface, but undercurrents strong enough to drown the truth. He had seen it before, in venture pitch rooms where he was mistaken for the intern, in conferences where he wasn't handed a badge until someone Googled his name, and now, in a cabin full of curious superiority, he saw it again. But this time, it would not go unnoticed. This time, everything was being recorded. Data, speech, behavior, tone. Not to punish, not yet, but to ensure that when the mirror was held up, the reflection could not be denied. Darius reached into his carry-on, pulled out a soft black notebook, flipped to a blank page, and began writing. Not names, not quotes, but principles. How cultures codify contempt. How systems adopt micro-bias as default. He had built algorithms that could predict insurgencies. Now he would build one that would teach airlines how to see. The cabin light dimmed further, setting the mood for sleep. Most leaned back, wrapped in blankets, lulled by privilege and Pinot Noir. Darius stayed upright, gaze steady, hands poised over the keyboard of justice, not legal but behavioral. Struck. Real change never started with shouting. It started when someone decided to never let it happen again. The ambient lights of the cabin shifted again, casting a faint lavender hue across the polished surfaces and the tired but content faces of those reclined in comfort. Dessert had been cleared, the wine glasses emptied and replaced by bottles of spring water and folded menus in brushed leather covers, each monogrammed with the passenger's name in silver cursive. Darius lifted his own menu without expectation but out of habit, and the embossed name stared back at him. Mr. Kohler Darnis. He didn't blink. He read it once, then twice, and let the letters settle in his mind like sediment in clear water. Not Darius Cole. Not even close. A child could have rearranged the letters better. But this wasn't a typo. It was a statement. Not loud, not cruel, but casual. He held the menu in his hands a moment longer, then turned it over slowly, as if inspecting its material. Composition. The font matched the others. The print quality was identical. But it was the only name misspelled. He looked 2 seats over, across the aisle, where Ms. Tatiana Greer was printed flawlessly. She was smiling as she sipped green tea, apparently delighted by the accuracy. To her left, Donald Radcliffe leaned back with a self-satisfied grin, his name gleaming under the cabin light. No error, no question. Darius let the menu rest flat on his tray, a thin line forming at the corner of his lips, not quite a frown, not yet a smirk. He pressed the service button. A few seconds passed, then Karen appeared, her smile as polished as her name tag. "Yes, monsieur?" She trailed off intentionally, letting the moment linger like a bad joke. He gestured toward the menu. "This isn't my name," he said plainly. She glanced down, feigned a squint, then let out a rehearsed chuckle. Oh, my goodness. It must have been a printing error. These things are automated, you know. Happens sometimes." "To whom?" he asked. "Excuse me?" "How often does this automation mix up names in first class? Because I've flown this route 11 times. Never seen a mistake." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes blinked once slower than usual. "It's rare, I agree, but not unheard of. We'll make a note for the next flight." "It won't matter," he said, his voice now as measured as her indifference. "It won't matter." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she shifted the conversation. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Cole?" "Still water, please." She nodded and turned, but didn't move with urgency. Minutes passed. The cart rolled up and down the aisle twice. 2 other passengers received their drinks, sparkling water with lemon scotch on the rocks. A rare Japanese whiskey that hadn't even been listed on the menu. Darius remained without. Another 5 minutes passed. He pressed the button again. Karen returned, no tray in hand. "Yes?" "Still waiting on that water," Darius said, his voice low but precise. Karen tilted her head, then looked around, theatrically scanning the cabin before replying, just loud enough for neighboring passengers to hear. "I'll get to it soon, sir. I'm prioritizing our Diamond executive flyers at the moment. I'll circle back when I can." The words hung in the air like static. A few passengers glanced over, some with curiosity, others with the subtle amusement that followed unspoken judgment. Darius didn't flinch. He nodded once. "Of course," he said, louder this time. "Wouldn't want to interrupt the natural order of things." Karen's jaw tensed, but she walked away. Darius leaned back in his seat and took a slow breath. His fingers tapped once, twice, on the armrest, then stopped. The AI on his tablet had already registered the sound as a pattern trigger. An alert popped up. "Verbal response log activated, database status confirmed." The system began tracking voice tone keyword flags and staff fulfillment. It was the kind of tool built for government threat assessment. Now, it was documenting negligence with surgical precision. He didn't need to do anything more than wait. The logs would show that his request for water took 18 minutes to fulfill, while passengers in similar or lesser tiers were served in under 5. The tone log would record Karen's volume shift when speaking to him versus others. It wasn't about volume, it was about framing. Passive aggression made visible through analysis. Across the cabin, the man in 1B sipped from a crystal glass and leaned toward the woman across the aisle. "Guy's still upset about the steak," he muttered with a chuckle, probably expecting a personal chef at 30,000 feet. The woman laughed, then flipped her menu over. "Did you see his name? Kohler Darnis? Sounds like a knockoff cologne." More laughter. "Not cruel, just familiar." That was the point. Back in his seat, Darius checked the time. Still 6 hours to Zurich. Plenty of data left to gather. He wasn't humiliated. He wasn't even angry. He was something far more dangerous, focused. He knew the patterns, not just of individuals but of systems, and this one was beginning to reveal itself line by line. Karen returned 22 minutes later. No apology, just a plastic cup of lukewarm water set down with a curt nod. "Easy go," she said, already halfway turned away. Darius looked at the cup, then at her. "Thank you, Miss H. Or, is it Miss Heron?" She froze, just a fraction. "Excuse me?" She just wondering how the system might spell your name if the roles were reversed. He smiled gently. She didn't. She walked away. And the log kept building. The still water sat untouched on the tray table, as Darius reclined ever so slightly, his fingers interlaced over his abdomen, eyes closed but not asleep. He wasn't resting, he was processing. The way his name had been butchered, the service disparities, the overt smirks disguised as oversight. Every insult was subtle, but when stacked like bricks they formed a wall. The illusion of civility in first class had started to unravel, not in fiery confrontation, but in the cold mechanics of exclusion. And now, the cabin prepared to deliver its next message, one that had nothing to do with food, or menus, or napkins. It came from the seat behind him, 2A, a man in his early 40s, built thick like a former college athlete turned real estate magnate, leaned forward slightly and tapped the side of Darius's seat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dipped in the syrupy tone of condescension. Darius turned calmly, his expression neutral. "Yes?" The man gestured vaguely around them. "I was just thinking, if you're not enjoying the experience up here, maybe one of the attendants could find a better fit. Coach, maybe? You seem a little on edge." Darius stared at him, not speaking. The man clarified, as if he were offering a helpful suggestion. "No offense. You just look uncomfortable. Maybe it's not your usual class of travel. Happens to some folks." Silence hung like fog, the kind that never reached his eyes. Darius nodded slowly. "I appreciate your concern," he said evenly. "But I assure you, I've flown this route more than you have properties in escrow." The man blinked, not understanding, or pretending not to. He shrugged, leaned back into his seat, and muttered something inaudible to his seatmate, who responded with a half-hearted chuckle. Darius turned forward again, the moment recorded not just in memory, but by Novatrak's passive mic surveillance, time-stamped, stored, categorized. A new entry appeared on his screen. Peer isolation attempt, cabin 2A. Verbal flag, class displacement. 3 minutes later, a small turbulence alert blinked overhead. Nothing serious, just light chop. The attendants resumed their stride, moving up and down the aisle with curated grace. But when Darius pressed the call button above him, the light blinked once, then remained solid blue. He standard service request. He had no intention of escalating, just a simple ask, a blanket to replace the one folded near his seat, which had a faint stain near the hem. His finger remained lightly pressed on the armrest, relaxed, not impatient. He waited. 3 minutes passed, then 5. A tray clattered in the galley, followed by polite laughter from the direction of seats 1B and 2C. Darius kept his posture still, eyes open, gaze straight ahead. The button remained lit. After 10 minutes, he shifted slightly, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, tapping his watch to double-check the internal timestamp. Still no response. At minute 13, a male attendant walked down the aisle. Darius made eye contact direct, unmistakable. The attendant, tall with neatly combed hair and a badge that read Owen, looked right at him, hesitated, and then diverted his gaze to the other side of the cabin. He moved briskly past, pausing at seat 2B to refill a glass of Bordeaux. Darius tracked the motion, not in anger, but in rhythm. Every step, every missed opportunity for acknowledgement, was a note in a larger composition. The call light continued to shine. At minute 15, a different attendant approached the passenger in 1B, the same man who'd received Darius's steak and offered him a choice between a hot towel and a branded moisturizer kit. Darius finally raised his voice, not loudly but firmly. Both attendants paused. The one holding the tray turned, eyes polite, surprised. "Yes, sir?" "I requested assistance 15 minutes ago," Darius said. "Button's been lit the entire time." The attendant glanced up, confirmed the glowing call signal, and shifted slightly. "Apologies, sir. Must have been a system delay. What can I assist you with? Darius gestured to the blanket. A fresh one. This one's stained. The attendant nodded, too quickly. Of course. Right away. He disappeared toward the galley. Darius watched him go. Not to hurry him, but to track the moment for record. The data feed on his tablet marked the interaction, service response delay, 1532, cabin 1A, staff O&L bypass noted. The same attendant returned shortly with a folded blanket in protective plastic. Here you go, sir. Again, sorry for the wait. Darius accepted it silently, then unfolded it, checking both sides for cleanliness. It passed. He laid it across his lap without a word. A moment later, Owen passed by again, this time with a tray of espresso shots for seats 1C and 1D. He paused for a fraction too long near Darius, then moved on, not saying anything. The air between them held weight not personal but institutional. Behind Darius, a hushed whisper reached his ears. The man in 2A again, speaking to his seatmate. Can't take a delay without turning it into a speech, he said. The seatmate laughed. Entitlement. Knows no class these days. Darius didn't respond. The words didn't matter. The pattern did. The structure. The repeated decisions, each small but together a tapestry of targeted indifference. He reached for his pen and jotted a note into the black notebook beside him. Systemic courtesy decay begins with selective neglect, not denial. Then he drew a single horizontal line across the page, a habit he developed when tracking patterns that were about to shift, because when systems pushed far enough, they eventually snapped. And when they did, someone had to be ready not just to redirect, but to redirect. The folded blanket now lay neatly across Darius's lap, but it brought no comfort, no warmth. If anything, it was symbolic, a curtain draped over something rotten, an attempt to smooth over a surface too far gone. The air in the first-class cabin was still, the buzz of muted conversation and glassware clinks forming the faint wallpaper of quiet elitism. He glanced out the window. Thousands of feet below, the Atlantic slept beneath stars, unaware of the slow unmasking happening 30,000 feet above it. Darius tilted his tablet screen back toward him. Novatrack Sentinel had finished compiling the full-service routing logs for Flight 917, and what he saw next only confirmed what his instincts had already whispered. His meal, prime rib, filet cut, medium rare, had indeed been logged correctly in the system 6 days prior. The entry matched his VIP dietary profile and bore a timestamp with confirmed acceptance from Stratusair's back-end provisioning AI. The original tray, marked Cabin 1A, Priority Request, had been logged into cold storage in Gate D5's preload section at 9:47 AI. However, a secondary timestamp raised a red flag at exactly 1:12 p.m., 38 minutes before boarding. The tray was removed from cold storage. But then, nothing. It wasn't returned. No reseal, no discard. Just a gap. That was the first anomaly. He dug deeper. At 1:37 p.m., only 6 minutes before the scheduled delivery to the cabin cart, a new entry appeared. Meal override, Capicon, substitute seafood 14. Karen H., cabin service lead. Darius tapped the code, and Novatrack pulled her internal operations history from partner-accessible employee behavior logs. Her record was clean, on-paper commendations for efficiency, high passenger satisfaction, but Darius didn't trust clean services anymore, especially when the data behind them told a dirtier story. He pulled up her interaction history across 6 months of internal audit logs. In 5 previous flights with minority VIPs seated in 1A or 1B, meal changes had occurred within the same 2-hour window before takeoff. Twice, passengers had left private complaints noting unexpected substitutions. None were elevated beyond internal coaching. He exhaled slowly, then cross-queried the tray's handling history. A thermal sensor log from the food safety system showed that the original steak tray for cabin 1A had sat outside of regulated cold storage for 17 minutes at room temperature. The threshold for safe service was 10. Another override had been entered. Manual clearance. The K had spoiled. Not to the point of visible rot, but enough for the protein to soften, for bacteria to rise past the invisible line of luxury cuisine into the realm of negligence. So they'd swapped it out. Not because of scarcity, not because of logistics, but because someone had decided that his Seat 1A, name spelled wrong, ignored in sequence, wasn't worth the premium tray anymore. Instead, that tray had gone to William Radcliffe in 1B, whose status as a Diamond Legacy member had apparently superseded Darius's role as one of Stratus's heirs. The system showed a blank under his profile, which meant someone else had placed it for him. Another manual override. Same ID. The pieces were aligning like a slow, cruel mosaic. Someone had deemed Radcliffe more fitting for the filleted. Someone had intentionally downgraded Darius first, the cutlery, then the name, and now, perhaps, the health risk. Seam remembered the subtle itch in his throat after the file. Not dangerous, not acute, but enough to warn, enough to prove intent. He pulled up the temperature trajectory of the seafood linguine served in its place. The shrimp had been held at proper temperature, the switch had been clean, but the justification, the idea that this substitution was spontaneous, a last-minute change by chance, was shattered. This wasn't random. This was structured negligence, camouflaged by fake urgency, and now, immortalized in logs. Darius tapped a prompt. A secure window opened. Prepare immediate incident file, Tier 1 threat, code, internal bias flag. The system began packaging the event markers into a compressed file. All the tags, name error, utensil discrepancy, service delay, social ostracisms, meal reassignment, thermal override. He encrypted it, attached his internal verification overorder, and titled the file Cabin 1A Flex 9916 Disparity Log. Before sending it, he paused. Not because he was unsure, but because he knew what this meant. He wasn't triggering a complaint. He was launching a procedural audit. One that, under Stratus Air's agreement with Colnova, would automatically escalate to executive review, legal advisory, and internal ethics council, all within 24 hours. He closed the window without hitting send. Not yet. There was more to see. One final query beckoned: to passenger reassignment logs. Darius keyed in Radcliffe's name, cross-referenced it with boarding time, and confirmed the final twist. At 12:46 p.m., barely 1 hour before departure, Radcliffe had been reassigned from 2D to 1B. That move had been authorized by Cage 214. The same hand. She hadn't just reassigned a tray. She'd reassigned the man to sit next to Darius, as if daring him to notice. Or simply believing he wouldn't. Darius leaned back again. His gaze drifted to the cabin ceiling, to the soft recessed lighting that made everything glow golden and civilized. The illusion was impressive, but now he had seen past it. Not through outrage or escalation, but through the structure of the system itself. And what he saw wasn't random error. It was designed exclusion. Delivered with a napkin, heavy and smile. A swap. Quiet, calculated. And now, exposed. The file remained open on Darius's screen, quietly humming with encrypted heat. A loaded chamber of accountability waiting for a trigger. His fingertips hovered just above the surface, not in hesitation, but in orchestration. Timing was everything. He hadn't moved in several minutes, a statue of composure in a chaos disguised as luxury. Around him, passengers reclined deeper into their seats, lulled by comfort, drinks, and the presumed invincibility of entitlement. But a shift was coming, subtle at first, like the pressure change before a storm. It arrived in the form of a younger flight attendant, not part of the core team that had hovered around the elite like trained bees, but clearly new, perhaps a reserve rotation. Her uniform was crisp, but lacked the polish of the others, and her eyes moved with curiosity rather than control. She approached slowly, holding a stack of hand towels and quietly making her way row by row, her eyes scanning passenger names and interactions with the watchfulness of someone still learning the hierarchy. When she reached 1A, she paused, noticing Darius's screen just as he tilted it slightly to check another log entry. Her breath caught, not because of what she saw exactly, but because she recognized the interface, the color-coded console, the biometric access markers glowing faintly at the edge. That was no entertainment menu. That was a military-grade dashboard, one not designed for civilian use. She leaned in just slightly, cautious, respectful. Her voice was low but tinged with curiosity, and something else. Caution. Sir, I'm sorry, but that looks like... She hesitated, then glanced around to make sure no one else could hear. That looks like internal systems access. Darius turned his head slightly toward her, calm as ever. his expression unreadable. "It is," he said simply. She blinked, clearly unsure whether to escalate or retreat. I wasn't aware that passengers could interface with onboard data systems." Her tone wasn't accusatory, just uncertain. Darius offered a small nod. "They can't," he replied. "Not unless they built them." The attendant's eyes widened just a fraction. She tried to recover, but the weight of his words hung in the air. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to intrude. I haven't seen anything like that before." Darius tilted his screen toward her for a moment, revealing a small portion of the interface, just enough for her to catch the security header. "Cole Nova Sentinel Partner Access Tier 0 Clearance," she inhaled quietly. That header wasn't just high level, it was sovereign access, meaning whoever sat in front of it didn't just use the system, they governed it. Then came the question, quiet but unmistakable. "Sir, if I may, who are you?" Darius didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't seek dramatic flair. His voice remained the same, steady, measured, anchored. "I'm the one who signed off on the security infrastructure that protects every flight in this fleet," he said. "The software you're running for passenger behavior analysis, meal tracking, crew rotation logs, and cabin surveillance, my team wrote it. I approved its final deployment last year." The young woman's eyes widened again, this time with recognition. She wasn't part of the decision-makers, but she had sat through the mandatory onboarding that introduced the Cole Nova systems as the technological spine of Stratosair's new era. It had been framed as a leap into the future of elite aviation data-integrated safety. Predictive service analytics, VIP pattern profiling. It was said to be unbreachable, untouchable. And yet, the man who had designed its heart was now sitting in 1A, with the wrong name printed on his menu, and a downgraded salad on his tray. "I didn't know," she said softly, almost like an apology. "You weren't supposed to," Darius answered, not unkindly. "The system works best when it observes without interference." She hesitated, then stepped slightly closer, lowering her voice again. "Are you investigating something, sir?" He nodded once. "I'm documenting." "There's a difference." "Documenting what?" she asked, genuine now, no longer just a crew member but a witness. "Patterns," he said. "Choices. Who gets what, how it's delivered, who gets seen, and who gets assumed." The attendant glanced over her shoulder, toward the galley where Karen stood speaking to a senior passenger, laughing in that deliberate, performative way that sounded like hospitality but echoed like hierarchy. "Will you be reporting this?" the attendant asked, still hushed. Darius tapped the screen once. "Yet. Right now I'm just collecting the truth." She stood silent for a beat, then whispered, "Is there anything I can get you, Mr. Cole?" She said his name carefully now, the right name, the only name. "No," he replied, meeting her eyes for the first time with warmth, "but thank you for asking." She nodded once and walked away, slower this time, as though gravity had changed around her. Darius returned his gaze to the tablet. The log now included a new entry. Staff Member Awareness Checkpoint, Unintentional Exposure, Crew ID 8492. He tagged it, not as a violation but as a variable. Every system had them, unexpected agents of clarity, anomalies that didn't break the algorithm but revealed its bias. Across the cabin, Radcliffe let out a loud guffaw, laughing at some story he was telling to the couple in 2C. Karen leaned in, offering him a cloth napkin and a refill of the Japanese whiskey Darius had noted earlier, as listed under his own preferences. Darius watched, but without malice. He needed it to finish, to show itself, because once the system revealed its full design, he wouldn't need to shout. He would simply open the back door and let it collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. The glow of Darius's screen reflected softly against the glass of his untouched water, casting a quiet ripple across its surface. Outside, the night sky stretched into endless black, speckled with stars that blinked like silent witnesses to the unraveling truths aboard Flight 917. His breath was calm, pulse steady, hands deliberate as he typed one single line into the command interface. "Initiate bias trace protocol, cabin 1A. Flight 917, full stack audit." The screen paused for a microsecond before responding in white text over black. "Command confirmed. Running analysis." In an instant, hundreds of sensors across the cabin activated in passive silence. The aircraft's onboard surveillance AI, integrated through the NovaTrack suite, began cross-referencing every visual, verbal, and behavioral data point recorded since boarding. Every staff interactions, every food log, every microphone buffer, and every tray assignment was brought under scrutiny. It began with the seat manifest, timestamp seating adjustments, VIP tier overrides, and flight record priority. The system flagged 3 unusual changes. 1. The reassignment of William Radcliffe from seat 2D to 1B within 1 hour of departure. 2. The manual override on meal distribution for cabin 1A. And 3. A service delay log of over 15 minutes without attendant response, all tied to one staff identifier, KH214. Darius watched as the screen populated with heat maps showing walking patterns of the crew across the cabin. Karen H. had passed seat 1A 17 times without initiating verbal contact. Other attendants had responded to seats 1B through 2D in under 2 minutes. By contrast, the average response time to Darius had been flagged at 11.3 minutes. He tapped a control node, initiating the next layer. Service disparity audio filter. The interface extracted phrases, tone frequencies, and volume differential. Within seconds, it pulled 2 segments. Karen's elevated volume when stating, "I'm serving our premium guests first," and Owen's offhand comment in the galley, "People like that will eat whatever you give them." The algorithm didn't just listen to words, it listened to weight, intent, pattern. The screen blinked again. Red alert. Disparity confidence level 92.4%. Correlated bias behavior confirmed. It was enough. Darius compressed the data package, signed it with his executive clearance, and selected a destination, Stratus Air Corp. The subject line read only, "Urgent Flight 917 System Integrity Violation." He hit send. Cross, the Atlantic Company, 5 time zones ahead, in a glass tower that crowned Geneva's central business district. The secure servers at Stratus Air's headquarters pinged once, then again. Inside the 42nd floor command center, a notification escalated past usual filters. Within seconds, it reached the direct tablet of Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus International, a man known for meticulous silence and reformist roots. He opened the encrypted file with biometric verification, and his face tightened as he scrolled. Each frame told a story he had long feared but never confirmed. Selective service, manual downgrades, mapped out in irregulable code, and candid video. The final report summary landed with surgical weight. Client 1A, repeated systemic neglect. Initiator, Darius Cole, Tier 0 partner. Audit recommended. Edmonds didn't hesitate. He tapped the emergency relay on his screen and opened a 3-word command panel, used only for code-level incidents. He entered, "Executive Internal Review." Then, to his assistant, he dictated one line. "Notify, Legal, HR, and Brand Integrity, Flight 917 under live review. Data confirms behavioral bias." Across the room, another monitor blinked red. The system was now pulling internal crew emails. Messages exchanged between Karen H. and Owen included phrases such as, "Just another VIP with attitude." Some of them, "Think suit gets you anything," and "If he wants steak, tell him to invest in cattle." None were overtly racial, but the bias was implicit, patterned, chilling. Back on the aircraft, Darius received the confirmation on his tablet. Review order confirmed by CEO. Escalation protocol initiated. Flag brand risk category A. He didn't smile. He didn't relax. He simply tapped the screen once more and opened the final dashboard. Cabin Behavior Index. The cabin camera feeds legally installed for safety and stored in encrypted cycles were now being evaluated by the AI for body language, eye contact, distribution, and service tone modulation. The results were clinical. Passengers in seats 1B and 2C received eye contact within 1.2 seconds of being addressed. Darius in 1A 3.9 seconds on average. He was referred to as Sir 40% less frequently. The tone metrics were sharper, more formal, and consistently lower in engagement warmth. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Karen continued chatting with Radcliffe, unaware that her laughter was being cross-referenced against tone analysis models trained on corporate microaggression litigation. Darius sat still. Calm, the cabin was unchanged, but the system beneath it had shifted. Every thread of exclusion that had once been invisible now lay illuminated in full daylight, and those who spun the threads were still smiling as if their reality would remain unchallenged. But the audit had started, and this time, silence wouldn't protect them. The moment the aircraft's tires screeched softly against the tarmac, the entire weight of Flight 917's journey landed not just on wheels, but on the shoulders of those who had turned casual cruelty into routine. The seatbelt signs remained lit. The pilot thanked passengers with polished calm, but Darius already knew the next phase had begun. His watch vibrated once, an encoded message from Stratus HQ. Command code R917, confirmed. Ground team deployed. CE-level escort arranged. He closed the interface and slid the device into the inner pocket of his blazer. Around him, passengers began to stir, unaware that the sky they floated through had shifted while they sipped champagne. He rose with measured ease, straightened the hem of his coat, and stepped into the aisle just as the doors clicked open and the jet bridge connected. Waiting just outside the cabin threshold, flanked by 2 security officers and a woman in a charcoal gray suit holding a digital clipboard, was Geneva's Crisis Response Liaison for Stratus Air. Her badge gleamed. Command and Ethics Division. She didn't extend a hand. She nodded once with the precision of someone executing protocol. Behind her stood 3 more figures, representatives from legal, brand integrity, and corporate compliance. Their expressions were unreadable, trained, but their presence alone was louder than any reprimand. Karen H. emerged from the galley behind Darius, expecting, perhaps, to receive her usual polite applause from disembarking elite flyers. Instead, her steps slowed as she registered the faces outside, then froze entirely when she saw Darius turning slightly to greet the liaison with a nod. Their eyes met for half a second. Hers widened. His didn't. She understood now. Every skipped tray, every lowered tone, every misplaced menu had been recorded. Not in rage, but in real time. She stepped back instinctively, and a man from HR, discreet in posture but firm in movement, walked forward and gestured. "Ms. H, please come with us. You've been asked to report to Interim Review Room B." Her mouth opened as if to report to debrief. It was a reckoning. As passengers exited, few noticed the shift. Stratus had learned from past scandals. There would be no security dragging, no viral videos, no headlines about angry confrontations. Instead, there was procedure. Precision. All members flagged in the audit, Karen H., Owen L., and 2 more who had participated in the biased treatment, were guided through a discreet exit and separated into individual rooms on the service level of the terminal. Their devices were requested for verification, their shift schedules locked, their access badges deactivated pending review. But they were not shamed. They were not paraded. Instead, they were handed envelopes marked with the company's seal and the words "Mandatory Professional Recalibration." Inside each envelope was a directive, suspending pending completion of a comprehensive ethical retraining program overseen by the newly formed Stratus Council on Fair Service. The course wasn't just legal compliance, it was philosophical, psychological, cultural. It was designed by ethicists, trauma-informed facilitators, and veteran customer advocates. The curriculum began with one phrase printed at the top of the first page: "Luxury does not excuse exclusion." Meanwhile, Darius exited the terminal, with the command liaison walking one respectful step behind him. Waiting in the arrivals lane was a sleek black car, its side marked with a discreet Stratus insignia. He entered without fanfare. Inside the car was a sealed folder addressed to him personally, signed by CEO Charles Edmonds. It contained a formal apology, but more importantly, a list of internal policy reforms already underway. Among them, the elimination of manual meal overrides without dual authentication, implementation of real-time service disparity alerts via cabin sensors, and the requirement that all first-class staff undergo quarterly empathy audits, measured both by performance and anonymous peer review. At Stratus's headquarters, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Screens displayed the flagged footage, not to shame, but to study. They watched as Karen's tone shifted when speaking to Darius versus Radcliffe. They observed Owen's diverted gaze. They heard the laughter that followed subtle slights and saw the moments when response time slowed not by accident, but by assumption. Edmonds stood at the head of the table, quiet for a long moment before stating what no one dared deny. "This is the consequence not of malice but of permission, and that ends today." Radcliffe, meanwhile, received a private message from the executive relations team. Not a threat, a conversation request, an invitation to reflect. His seat upgrades would be reviewed. His loyalty status would be maintained for now, but his name was now part of a quiet ledger, an internal culture map tracking behaviors that no AI alone could predict. He wasn't punished, but he had been seen, and in future flights he would know. Back in the crew quarters, Karen sat in a room alone, staring at a playback of herself delivering the phrase, "We serve premium guests first." She hadn't realized how loud it sounded, how sharp. The facilitator, a soft-spoken former hospitality director, entered and said gently, "Let's talk about what you think luxury means." Karen didn't answer, not yet, but the question hung heavier than she expected. Owen, in another room, was handed a report summarizing his galley comment. He laughed nervously, then stopped, when the facilitator didn't. "It was just a joke," he said. The facilitator replied evenly, "Yes, that's why we're here." Across terminals, the rest of the crew remained in debrief. They weren't fired, but they weren't flying anytime soon. Not until they passed the final evaluation, not until they understood that indifference is the softest form of injustice, and the most dangerous when institutionalized. And all the while, above the clouds they had once ruled, unchallenged, a new kind of turbulence settled in, not of air pressure, but of conscience. The seasons turned quietly, and with them, the name Flight 917 evolved from scandal to case study, then from case study to transformation. 1 year after that flight landed in Geneva, the reverberations were no longer tremors of consequence, but seeds of reform that had taken root across every level of stratospheric service culture. Inside the company's global training academy in Lisbon, where new crew members from over 50 countries now gathered for orientation, a woman in a gray blazer stood before a wide screen displaying a simple phrase, "Respect is not luxury, it's the foundation." Karen Hartley, once known internally as the senior cabin crew involved in one of the most quietly damning audits in the airline's history, now served as the director of the Fair Service Initiative, a comprehensive ethics and inclusion program born directly from the fallout of her own actions. Her voice had changed, still clear, still poised but softer, grounded, not by shame but by ownership. Her eyes met the group of trainees before her, many young, eager, some older and skeptical, but all attentive. She clicked to the next slide and spoke with a calm that carried more weight than passion. "I'm not here today because I did things right," she said. "I'm here because I didn't, and I learned exactly why that matters." Months before this moment, after her temporary suspension and the completion of the service integrity program mandated by Stratus, Karen had requested a meeting, not with a PR manager, not with an executive, but with Darius himself. The request had gone unanswered for 3 weeks. Then one morning a reply came in the form of a letter. Not cold, not dismissive, just a simple acknowledgement. "If your intent is reflection, not reputation, I'll listen." Karen took that offer and turned it into action. She spent the next month studying every page of the audit report, every second of cabin footage, every word she herself had spoken on that flight. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't meant to be. The hardest moment came when she reached the service logs detailing the food reassignment, the moment she'd manually overrode a premium meal to favor a more familiar name. She'd rationalized it as efficiency, but now she saw it as something else entirely. A moment when assumption overpowered accountability. When she finally sat down to write Darius, it wasn't a corporate apology, it was a confession. The letter began with simple words. "I once believed you were just lucky, a man in a good suit with good timing. But I've come to see that it was never about luck. It was about effort. And I was the one who had been handed a title I never truly earned." Darius never replied. But one day, quietly, her inbox received a forwarded message, an internal note from the Office of Equity Compliance that read, "Mrs. Hartley's proposed program has received Tier 1 funding. Recommendation, proceed to implementation." It was signed, D. Cole. That was all. No flourish, no benedictions, just a door opened. Karen stepped through it. Now, inside the academy, she turned back to the class. "I can't erase what I did," she said, "but I can make sure none of you ever assume what I assumed. That some people don't belong, that silence is harmless, that politeness is the same as fairness." A trainee raised their hand. "What made you change?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Because for the first time, someone didn't yell at me. They didn't humiliate me. They just showed me exactly what I had done, and they made me sit with it. That kind of mirror doesn't break. It breaks you." The class was quiet, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. Outside the academy, Stratus Air had already begun to rebuild itself, with more than policies. It had begun with people. Hundreds of attendants had since gone through the fair service program. Complaint volumes dropped, passenger trust metrics rose, but the most telling change came in the culture of discretion, where once the silence of micro-disrespect had reigned, now crew members spoke up for one another, corrected assumptions mid-sentence, and asked questions they used to fail. In the boardroom, executives began incorporating service equity data into performance reviews, not as a quota, but as a principle. At an international leadership forum in Johannesburg, Darius Cole delivered a keynote address on algorithmic fairness. He didn't mention Flight 917. He didn't need to. But he ended his speech with a single statement. "The most dangerous thing we normalize is not violence. It's the quiet belief that some discomforts are too small to matter. They are not." Back in Lisbon, after class ended, Karen sat alone reviewing training footage. One clip showed a trainee pausing before serving a drink, double-checking the name card on the tray and correcting a misprint before proceeding. A small thing, but not small. She smiled to herself. Her phone buzzed a message from an old colleague, now in the Los Angeles base. It read, "I used to roll my eyes at this. Now I'm rewriting how." Karen placed the phone down, looked at her reflection in the darkened screen, and whispered, "I stayed because someone didn't let me look away." Outside, the Lisbon sun poured golden light across the glass facade of the training center. Inside, the future of service, not just in Stratus but in the industry, was being built one corrected assumption at a time. If this story made you think differently about justice, dignity, or what true power looks like, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives like this one. Which part of Darius's journey struck you the most? Was it the quiet resistance, the system collapse, or the unexpected transformation? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments. We'd love to know who's tuning into these stories from around the globe.